Hello, everyone. Welcome to NFL Week 13 Inside the Lab. I am your host, Brian. I am joined, as always, by Ian Hartitz and Matthew Friedman. We're here to talk some of the Week 13 injuries that we just got word on and how it affects our models, our projections, and then we'll answer some user questions at the end. So if you've never been on a show before, definitely get into the YouTube chat. We're broadcasting this on YouTube. Definitely get in the chat in there, and we'll pick some questions at the end for about 5 minutes, whatever you guys have questions about. All right, guys, let's dive in. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get into some of these injuries. All right, here we go. Ian, first one we'll start on is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've had quite a bit of injury news this week. We've had Doug Martin, Cameron Brate, Deshaun Jackson, Mike Evans all be on the injury report. Who's in, who's out, and what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, you said it, man. Everyone's been all over the place with this Buccaneers squad. Brate and Deshaun Jackson will be playing, so Jameis should have his weapons, who is also back, by the way. Jameis was able to practice all week. Shoulder's feeling better, wasn't limited at all, so he'll be out there. Doug Martin's still in the concussion protocol. Peyton Barber will be starting. Still expect Charles Sims to be there, pass down back, and Jacquizz Rodgers should be, active as well. But the one problem with this offense is really the loss of, we're looking at DeMar Dotson, their starting right tackle, Joe Hawley, their backup center, and Ali Marpet, their starting center, are all out. So a lot of problems on that offensive line, and they're facing a Packers defense that will welcome back both Kenny Clark and Clay Matthews. So tough battle on the line of scrimmage.
Cool. Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on this? And then also another interesting note, this is played in Green Bay. It's not super cold. It's projected to be, 45-ish, 50 degrees. Is that any concern for a team, that's usually playing in warmer weather?
Yeah, it's interesting to mention the weather concerns. I hadn't thought too much about that because it's 47-ish that right now it's what we have it projected for, and winds around 6 miles per hour. I'm not super focused on the weather. Out of the options we have here, Evans is interesting given that he has great matchups wherever he lines up, and the same with Deshaun Jackson. I'm slightly interested in Peyton Barber now that the news has come down that he is going to be the guy who's starting. He's only, I believe, 3,900 on DraftKings. So that's, pretty substantial price for a guy. Let me rephrase that. Pretty substantial workload potentially for a guy that cheap. So I doubt anyone would feel comfortable going with him in cash, but there could potentially be some tournament upside considering that he does get the goal line usage anyway.
For sure. Yeah. So I write an article every week about funnel defenses, and interestingly enough, the Buccaneers had one of the higher ratings as far as being funneled into the pass. They definitely like to throw the ball a lot, and Green Bay is a fairly decent pass funnel defense. So it's sort of what the Buccaneers want to do, and what the Packers do well sort of plays right into that strategy. So I think the Buccaneers, obviously Mike Evans will probably be fairly popular, but overall this pass offense could find some success. Let's keep on moving here. Let's go to the other side of this matchup, Ian. We got word that Aaron Jones is going to be in. We've seen Jamal Williams play really well the last couple of weeks as the main guy. Do we have any idea of what Jones being back is going to have as far as like an impact on Williams?
Yeah, we're expecting Williams to kind of work as that 1A back with Jones in that 1B role. Kind of tough to get a handle on what McCarthy is always thinking, but he has shown in the past, even this season, that he's a little bit hesitant to throw running backs just back in the fire after they've been out. Earlier this year, we saw timeout come back, and Aaron Jones basically lead back in that first week. So, obviously we can't guarantee the same amount of touches as we could otherwise if Aaron Jones was out, but definitely a situation with Jamal where we still expect him to be the lead back, even with Jones active.
Yeah, Freeman, what are your thoughts on this matchup? I'll pull up Jamal Williams' game log. Been pretty good. Obviously, really played well last week against a pretty decent Pittsburgh defense. Not an amazing game on the ground, but did see 5 targets. He's seen 11 targets over the last 2 weeks. Would you expect maybe the pass work to be down a little bit, or are you still expecting like similar workload, around 25 opportunities like he did last week?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to know how this is going to split, but I would lean towards Williams being the workhorse, which is kind of what they've said. And also, I think it's possible that Jones has come back earlier than maybe they really would have wanted, in part because Ty Montgomery went to IR. So I think it could be a situation where it's not that Jones is used sparingly, but that he's the clear number 2 guy. And Williams has shown enough, I think, in the passing game still to get some work there. And when he was in college, he didn't do much as a receiver as a junior and senior, but as a freshman, he actually had a lot of receiving usage. So I think he still has that capability to be a good receiver out of the backfield.
Interesting. Okay, so I think people are going to choose between, some of these lower priced running backs. Jamal Williams is obviously one of them at 4.7, still a very reasonable price tag, and we have him with a positive projected price plus minus and 9 to 12% ownership, so he'll still be somewhat popular. But a guy who is getting a little buzz, even though it's a really interesting matchup. Let's go to the Detroit Lions and talk about this low-priced running back, Theo Riddick, who is expected to get more work than usual with Ameer Abdullah out. Ian, what are your thoughts on the backfield here with Riddick in Washington with Abdullah not playing?
Yeah, it's Riddick, Washington, and we actually have a third back, undrafted free agent. So it's looking like Riddick and Dwayne Washington will be the main guys there. We saw Riddick actually get 10 carries a game in games that Abdullah missed last season. So, he's not the typical guy you want running between the tackles, but the Lions did finally show last season that they are willing to do that. But, this matchup, like you said, on the road in Baltimore against a really good Ravens defense that has also been good against receiving backs is worrisome. But, at that price point, Riddick is, one of the better receiving backs in the league. I do think attacking this Ravens secondary is at least a little bit easier on the inside than messing around with Jimmy Smith and some of those outside corners.
Yeah, for sure. Really obvious, a really interesting spot. Obviously, the Ravens have one of the best pass defenses in the league, but obviously a running back catching passes is a little bit different than on the outside. And Riddick does get a lot of work. He averaged over 5 receptions without Abdullah in the game. Friedman, what are your thoughts on him? If he's going to get that work in the passing game along with a couple extra runs, DraftKings PPR format seems like 3,400 is not a bad price, even in the bad matchup.
Yeah, he's really interesting, especially because of what we saw out of his usage in the previous seasons with Abdullah out. One thing to note, just to kind of fact check this, I think we tweeted out earlier that Riddick, Zenner, and Tion Green are the active running backs for the Lions today. But whether it's Zenner or it's Washington, those guys basically would play the same role. I think the person you're really interested in is Riddick.
Fair enough. Let's keep on moving. Let's go to this New Orleans game here. The Carolina Panthers traveling to the Superdome, the Coors Field of NFL DFS. Let's start on the New Orleans defensive side. We've had some injury notes. Obviously, we had Lattimore and Ken Crawley, cornerbacks for the Saints, out last week. Ian, Ken Crawley's in. Do we have any word on Lattimore?
Yeah, we're expecting Lattimore to come out and give it a shot. Still not 100%. Actually came out to practice Wednesday this week and then had a downgrade, but he's gonna try to give it a go. You said it though, man. Coors Field of fantasy football, but hasn't been obviously much better secondary this season. So definitely need to keep in mind that this will be a different unit, and the Panthers will also be without Greg Olsen likely. So we could see Devin Funchess against potentially hobbled Marshawn Lattimore, but this isn't the same defense that Cam's had so much success against over the years. So tougher matchup now that those two corners are active.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, right? So Friedman, looking in our trends tool, and we've done a lot of research this in our content. Cam has played in the Superdome, I think, 3 times in the last couple of years, and he's averaged over 35 DraftKings points. So on the one hand, that is really, really hard to fade. On the other hand, this defense is different. I guess the question is whether you think they're going to be full strength with Lattimore hobbled or not. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I'm not going to put too much stock into those splits because it's a small sample, and as you mentioned, it is a very different defense. Even if Lattimore is hobbled, Lattimore at, let's say, 80% is still better than the backups that they would be putting out there. And so whether it's Lattimore on Funchess or Crawley, and I don't think that the Saints are going to use shadow coverage in this game. They don't use shadow coverage all that much in general. So whoever it is that's on Funchess, it's a pretty good defensive back. And that's just a situation that Cam hasn't faced before with the Saints. So I don't know. I'm a little pessimistic on this spot for Newton.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts, Freeman, on Olsen being out? We saw Funchess last week get he got 50% of the targets with Cam last week, even with Olsen in. So it seems like he could just be a target monster, even in a bad matchup.
Yeah, so we weren't projecting all that many targets in the first place for Olsen, so it's not surprising. So I don't think it's a big target bump for Funchess in terms of our own projections. So a little bit goes to Funchess, a little more I think goes to Dixon, who would be filling in at tight end, and then I think another target or so probably goes to Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield.
Yep, makes sense. All right, let's keep on moving. We got a couple more to hit on here. Let's go to the Arizona Cardinals. Adrian Peterson, Ian, what's going on with him?
We don't know yet, man. It's going to be a game time decision. Hasn't been able to practice this week with this neck issue. If he's not able to go, we're expecting kind of a committee look from Kerwin Williams and DJ Foster. Williams had a rib injury, though, so it's hard to really get behind either of those guys if AP won't be able to go. Really like the spot for AP earlier in the week at home against Rams D. That's been, really good overall, but definitely better against the pass than they have been the run in terms of DVOA. But, it's tough to know. Neck injuries are tricky. So, we can guarantee the volume of Peterson will be out there, but how effective it'll be is the main question.
For sure, yeah. And we've seen Peterson splits just this year and the amount of work he gets when he's a favorite and they're ahead. And when he's not, he's obviously not exactly a pass catching back. So as a 7.5-point dog at home against a really high-powered Rams offense, probably not a situation where you want to target the Rams backfield here. Any thoughts on that, Freeman? Probably not too much.
No, I think I'm basically looking for a fade here of that entire situation. I think it's too risky, especially with it coming in the afternoon games.
Fair. All right, let's sit on one more situation here. Tennessee Titans. We did get word earlier in the week that Rashard Matthews is going to be out. He was out last week, and interestingly enough, Ian, Corey Davis, first-round draft pick for the Titans, was expected to be like the guy to really lead them in targets. He was pretty chalky last week, and turned out that Mariota just distributed the ball everywhere. I mean, everyone got 4 or 5 targets, sort of equal opportunity situation here in Tennessee. Rashard's out again. Are you expecting the same sort of market share distribution in this offense?
It's tough to say, man. I mean, I know last week we saw no one really get over 5 targets, but prior to that game, Corey had really been the featured receiver in the offense. Even with Matthews in the lineup, he actually had more targets than Matthews in games they were active together. For me, the thing I really like about this matchup is I think Houston might actually be a worse deep pass defense than the Colts at this point. We're getting Davis at a fraction of the ownership. Yeah, he didn't blow up last week, but he still caught all of his targets, and now he gets a Texans D that since J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless went out like in week 5, they're just getting shredded, man. These cornerbacks aren't bad when they got one of the best pass rushers in football, but the second you ask them to be on an island for a little bit longer, things get tougher. So it's hard to guarantee the market share after what we saw last week. Mariota's had his up and downs throwing the football this season, but with the matchup and everything, I'm down to go back on the Corey Davis train.
Yeah, Freeman, I mean, this is so interesting. On the one hand, the Tennessee Titans have not been good offensively this year. On the other hand, we know this upside of Mariota and this offense. We saw it last year, and their implied point total of almost 25 points, not bad. Yeah, I mean, this might be a situation to buy low on people just having some recency bias about Corey Davis, maybe even some Delaney Walker. I mean, these guys are projected for like 1% ownership in GPPs. What are your thoughts on like maybe where you want to be overexposed on this offense, if at all?
Yeah, I think the passing game is really interesting here. And as Ian mentioned, this Texans defense is just horrible right now. They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points in the league to opposing wide receivers. And that's, like with a month or 5 games with their, 2 best pass rushers, and those guys aren't available now. And then also they have just been totally exploited by quarterbacks, allowing top 2 fantasy points in the league to that position. So I think the passing game is where you want to stack. And I think because there will be people who have been bitten by this offense, they're just going to want to stay away. So it is a decent opportunity to be a little overexposed because of the matchup.
All right. Sounds good. Let's get to some user questions. I'm going to pull some of these from the chat. I got a couple good ones here. It seems like people are curious our thoughts on Jimmy Garoppolo, I mean, he's getting his first start with the San Francisco 49ers. They do have a not super easy matchup in Chicago. Chicago is interesting on their own right. They've had, I think, one of the hardest schedules this year, and now have the nice one at home against the 49ers. So let's just talk about this game a little bit. Ian, what are your thoughts on Garoppolo in his first start? Obviously not projected for a whole lot of ownership here in this game. Are you interested in any plays on either side?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen that much of Garoppolo, but he's obviously looked good in small stretches. But you said it, man. This Bears defense, just when they've been at home over the last 2 years, it's been a totally different group. And we've really seen them play well against the pass as a whole this season, wherever they've been. One concern for me is really Carlos Hyde. I know he's in this kind of good spot and got that ownership up there, but we've seen him get over 8 targets a game with C.J. Beathard under center, and with Hoyer, he just wasn't even close to that involved. So, he's definitely proven this season he's more of a receiving back than I think anyone thought he could be. But, was that role perhaps expanded by rookie quarterback, underwhelmed by pressure, dumping it off all the time? Possibly. So, still like Hyde, and he and Matt Breida are the only 2 active running backs. So, don't hate targeting the run game here, but think the ceiling on the whole Niners offense is pretty low.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, this is the most interesting question of the week. Is Jimmy Garoppolo actually #good, or is this another situation where Belichick worked his magic on the league, and it's maybe he's not quite as good as he looked in New England?
I think Jimmy Garoppolo is actually pretty good. I understand why we have him projected for 0 to 1% ownership. It totally makes sense because he is on the road going against the Bears defense that is pretty good. But the Bears, they're a little injured right now on the defensive side of the ball. Nothing major, but they're not as healthy as they were even just a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know. I'm interested in Garoppolo. Not like I think he's going to have a huge game, but I think there is some potential there. And I think he actually is much better than what they had there before. And I do have a lot of faith in Shanahan.
Cool. All right, let's keep on moving here. An interesting game. We had so many big spreads last week, guys. Massive spreads in week 12. This is the big one of the week here. The Chargers are 13.5. They're 14s in some places. Going against this Cleveland Browns defense, that is a pretty strong pass funnel. The Chargers have been really, really good in the pass game this week. Ian, what are your thoughts on this pass matchup? Obviously, like Phillip Rivers to Keenan Allen is going to be pretty popular. Are you worried about the spread? And is there any contrarian ways that you might want to play this game?
Spread's definitely a concern, but I think you said it. Browns have been a good enough run defense, although they've really struggled the last few weeks. That wouldn't be surprising for Rivers and these receivers to still get plenty of action early on in the game. The one big note I think is that Mike Williams, their top 10 pick, is out. He's been active last few weeks, and it's been hard for us to really map out the outside receiver snaps. Keenan's going to get his no matter who's active, but now we actually know Travis Benjamin and Tyrell Williams are going to, have their fair share of shots against this Browns defense that has really been hemorrhaging big plays this season. So, yeah, Keenan is the guy who's going to get fed all game, but if we can take a shot with Tyrell the Gazelle or Travis on the outside in a #revenge game, why not? Yeah.
Ben Freeman, what are your thoughts on those two guys specifically? And I know you're pretty much always fade Melvin Gordon camp, but is that especially so this week against this Browns defense that's actually not too bad against the run?
No, I think it's actually the spot for Melvin Gordon. I mean,
wow, okay.
At home is a huge favorite. That's when he crushes. And so even if he's going against a defense that makes opposing runners inefficient, what does that matter? He's always inefficient anyway. So as long as he gets his volume, and he should as a home favorite, then I think it's a good spot for him. And I agree with what Ian said on Keenan Allen in the middle. He's very likely to avoid McCourty. So a good spot for him. And then on the other side of this ball, guys, my stomach is in knots about Josh Gordon. I honestly, I don't know what to do in terms of rankings. It's unbelievable to me. So I know he has a horrible matchup. He has a horrible quarterback throwing to him. We have him projected for 5 to 8% ownership. I could see it being a little bit higher just with people wanting to play Josh Gordon. But I don't know. He's an all-pro caliber talent. And, even last year in the preseason, which I know it's the preseason, but he looked awesome against Brent Grimes, who was one of the better cornerbacks in the league. So I think you can even say okay, as of a year ago, he was still a top 10 NFL caliber wide receiver that type of guy in his first game back, if the offensive coaching staff is saying they're going to give him snaps and they want to use him, even in a tough matchup, like I think you have to think of him as sort of like maybe borderline, like top 20, top 30 type of wide receiver. So I don't know. I'm torn up about him.
Yeah, and we got news this morning that Hugh Jackson apparently wants to, or he's designed plays for him this week. I'm not sure if he's designed that. Yeah. Ian, did you hear that?
Yeah, I've never heard a coach like Hugh Jackson this week just talking about how his whole game plan is going through Josh Gordon.
Dude, he loves Josh Gordon.
I love Josh Gordon too, but oh man, it's this matchup. And Freedman didn't even mention. I mean, we talked about this morning too, but like Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram are the two best DNs in the league, and there is no one on this Browns O-line that can block them. So just a brutal matchup for really the Browns offense as a whole. But like Freeman said, Josh Gordon's a top talent. Now, can he be that top talent sober? We'll find out.
I think he can. I mean, so how many targets? Let's say like, I think 5 to 8 targets. I know it's kind of wide range, but I mean, I think he's going to get at least that much, maybe more. You know, like the Browns need to throw the ball in this game.
Yeah. They're 2 touchdown dogs. And like, where else are they going to go to, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Corey Coleman is good, but like other than that, it's going to be like Gordon Coleman. That's it. They're not going to run the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting for sure. Maybe this is the game stack, Freedman.
I don't know.
Like get the Chargers and then roll it back with Gordon.
Yeah, that is the game stack. Or Coleman. I think either one of them. I mean, you know, but it's Gordon, I don't know. I think he's sort of like the key to a lot with this slate.
I like it. All right. Let's get to a couple more questions. A lot of questions in our chat, and a good one, I think. What are we doing with this Chiefs team? You know, obviously they were so dominant offensively early on. Kareem Hunt was, you know, the highest priced running back after a couple of weeks. And then he's just like been pretty terrible as far as yardage and touchdowns. Only got 1 target in the past game last week. You guys have any thoughts on like regression? Is it eventually going to come? Were they overperforming in the beginning? Just thoughts on Kareem Hunt and this offense in general. Ian, I'll start with you. Freeman, you want to go? I think Ian might be frozen. Yeah, we lost Ian.
Okay. Yeah. I like the spot for Kareem Hunt for a couple of reasons. One, because his price has dropped. He hasn't been this cheap since the second week of the season. So a nice spot there for him. And his ownership is going to be low because he's just devastated investors for the past 2 weeks. So, you know, like in terms of like the market, like it's a good spot for him. And then it's not a great or a bad matchup versus the Jets. But one thing I do like is that over the course of the season, and those season-long statistics still matter, Hunt is 3rd in scrimmage yards and he's 5th in touches. So he's still a guy who's getting usage and getting production. And if you can get a guy like that when he's cheap and also, you know, relatively low owned to what we've seen recently, I think it's a pretty good time to invest.
For sure. All right. Maybe one last question. A game that I really like, and we're getting some questions about this one in the chat. The Denver Broncos versus the Miami Dolphins. We saw Paxton Lynch play really bad, but Trevor Siemian actually looked decent last week, coming in relief through 2 touchdowns. This Miami Dolphins, Matt, has been one of the stronger pass funnel defenses in the league this year. Obviously, traveling to Miami is not great, but we have seen some sharp movement. Miami's getting most of the tickets, but the line has moved, and Denver's now actually a favorite, so we see some sharp money. These guys are so cheap, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders. What are your thoughts on them in GPPs?
It's interesting. So at the beginning of the season, you would have been like, oh, this is Cutler versus Siemian. And then like a couple of weeks ago, you would have been like, oh, this is Matt Moore versus whoever. And then now it's back to Cutler versus Siemian. And that's probably like good for Devontae Parker on one side and then good for Demaryius Thomas on the other side. Also Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah. And what's really nice in terms of like this becoming potentially a shootout spot where both sides are throwing the ball, is that the Broncos, you know, their defense, it's still, you know, conceivably good, but it just hasn't been good in terms of preventing opposing passing games from getting touchdowns. And then now it's without Aqib Talib. So there are lots of ways in which you could stack this game and run it back if you were inclined to do so.
Yep.
So I'm interested in all of those receivers there. The one guy I wouldn't be as interested in is Landry in the slot. because he still has a fairly tough matchup against Chris Harris Jr., who's kind of like still like the one strong defensive back for the Broncos. And he plays not exclusively in the slot, but when the other team is in 3 wide sets, he's manning the slot. So he's going to be on Landry.
Cool. Last question. Are you expecting Geno Smith to win GPPs? Are you ready for that to happen?
Yes. It will happen.
Oh my gosh. What a week. Week 13. Definitely going to be interesting.
What a time to be alive.
Indeed. All right. Thank you guys for watching as always. Good luck to all of you playing in week 13. Hope to see Fantasy Labs guys at the top of the leaderboard. And we'll talk to you guys next Sunday.